First, though, because I think it's a fascinating story, I want to know your views. Should the farmer who built a mansion on the sly be forced to tear it down again? Rightstuff@5.tv is the address if you fancy emailing us your thoughts. Yesterday, the High Court ruled that Robert Fiddler must demolish the 4-bed mansion he built without planning permission. You've almost certainly heard of the case Fiddler, which is just the most unfortunate name under the circumstances. Finished the house at the end of 2002. And he'd cunningly concealed all the building work by screening the site with a 40-foot high wall made of hay bales. That's the mansions just behind that, in case you're wondering. He and the family moved in and stayed there, hidden behind those bales, for the next 4 years, because the law says if you live in a finished home, erected without permission, for 4 years, it becomes legal. The trouble is, the court took the view that the building in Surrey, which I reckon must be worth well over £1 million, wasn't finished until the last straw bale was removed. And as a result, Reigate and Banstead councillors are ordered Fiddler to tear it down. And as far as the law goes, I guess that's the right decision. The trouble is, I just don't see the point. I mean, it's a lovely-looking house. It stood for years without any objections. Yes, it was cheeky the way he built it, but then you could say the council's being, I don't know, bloody-minded, insisting it goes, especially as there's a report out today bemoaning the lack of rural housing in this country. The government's failing to meet its promise of 1,000 new homes a year. This guy Fiddler's doing them a favour, right, Larry?
I can see both sides of this, because actually I think it's fairly hideous, this house. And the question is what you're not...
I've seen worse.
I have, but what you don't know is what kind of sensitive moment. Maybe it's just... Maybe there's a lovely rural view and he's stuck his castle right in the middle of it.
A lovely rural view that was concealed by bales for 4 years.
No, hang on a second. There were grain silos before, but still, it's a rural view. And what we don't want is all of the greenness in our country to be covered with houses. That's the whole point. That's what the planning is there for.
But having covered a bit of a green bit with a bit of green belt with a house...
The local council, of course, will argue that if they allow him to keep it, then the next door neighbour won't want to... And so, what muddies the water...
You don't think he deserves a medal for coming up with the idea of the 40-foot...
Yeah, I think it's quite ingenious. And I, you know, he's gone to a lot of trouble and he's built it for his family and you know, I applaud that. And actually, I now think he shouldn't have to take it down. Oh. But I think he was sneaky. And I think that, you know, the problem is every day you read about how, you know, you get travellers come and they stick their caravans up and there's no planning permission, they're allowed to keep their caravans. So, unfortunately, people's belief in the planning system and that it's fair has, shall we say, been shaken slightly. And so there's lots of things that people do that perhaps they shouldn't possibly do. And so I think he should keep his house.
You think he should keep the house? I'm actually surprised you said that. What do you think, Craig?
I think it's illegal. And I think he should rip it down. Well, I live in a Grade 2 listed house and I have to follow up everything. You know, I had my roof replaced recently and you've got to go through planning permission. You know, you can't just put any old cheap slate on. You've got to have the right slate, you know, on the roof. You've got to have the right beams. It's got to be measured. You've got to have all, you know, it's a nightmare. But, you know, otherwise I could do the same thing, you know, just put a big... up.
I mean, is that... I mean, do you really think that all around the country sly builders will be erecting walls of hay to build their mansions
I mean, this is an example of something... OK, he's turned it into an OK-looking home, you know, which is OK, but what if it was all glass-fronted and then
you can only go on this case. He's built it, it's there, it's done. Fait accompli, live with it.
Well,
why tear it down?
Well, I can say this. If all the foundations are checked out, you know what I'm saying? If they do a proper sort of spec on it and see whether the foundations are built properly, if the drainage is
so as
good
long as the
for
house
the community...
is sound...
Yeah, if the house is completely sound and was built to spec, to builders' regulations, and it's all that, then take it to the community and let the people that live around it decide. But not him.
Very good idea.
Go on then, what do you think, Adam?
I think that's a very good idea. It's difficult in this one because if you do say, OK, now tear your house down, OK, so where does he live? Where does his children live? He's spent £50,000 on it and there's a perfectly good house which is being torn down and he's then, what, left perhaps destitute? He has to buy another house, mate. Yeah. I mean, so you're throwing somebody...
He owns the farm, and I always say you never meet a poor farmer. They always look for... they might pass themselves off as poor, but there's no such thing as a poor farmer.
That's true. But there's a lot of... So maybe, I'm not sure in this case, it kind of seems like hit him with a fine, but, I don't know, turfing someone out of their house completely. If it was an extension,
what it doesn't say is if he'd applied for planning permission and been turned down, which I would suspect has been the case, and therefore he thought, I'm going to build it anyway. And of course, that's going to wind up the local planning department, isn't it? No end. You know, had he put up a one-bedroom shack, they would have
It's really interesting that no one has really gone out and said, oh, what... I mean, you did, Larry, but I mean, you know, there's this huge argument encroaching on the green belt, blah, 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 which I suppose stands for something. But don't forget, you can email your thoughts on this. You may agree with the panel, you may not. Rightstuff@5.tv is the address for your thoughts on Mr. Fiddler.